Hey guys, Lewis from Recycle Bicycle Sales here. Today I wanted to talk about how to set up your suspension on your bike quickly and easily at home. So what is suspension? The suspension allows the frame to move separately from the wheel. So if the wheel was to hit a bump, or perhaps you did a jump and landed, it's able to just sort of absorb that impact through this piece of suspension. So why would you need to adjust your suspension? Well, there's a whole range of answers for that. I think a couple of the most common ones would be that perhaps your body weight might adjust how the suspension works. If you had a 50 kilogram child versus a 100 kilogram adult, perhaps the way that the suspension would act would be very different. We can make the bike feel exactly the same for both of those people, even if there's a 50 kilo difference between the two of them. Your suspension settings can make or break your ride. They can make a cheap bike feel amazing, and they can make an amazing bike feel cheap. Most adjustable suspension will have three main different settings here. We can talk about the air. People might even use the word sag when they're talking about the air. We can talk about the rebound, and we could talk about the compression. Let's dive into each of those topics so you have a proper understanding of what they all mean. The first adjustment that we can talk about is air. Similar to when you're pumping up a tire, you can pump air into the suspension. You can make it harder or you can make it softer. If you're a heavier rider, you might need it to be harder. If you're a lighter weight rider, you might want it to be a little bit softer. It's probably the main adjustment that you'll make. So the second thing that we can adjust is compression. Now, air is talking about the entire stroke. Compression is more just talking about the start of the stroke. This is talking about how much of an impact the suspension needs to actually start the stroke. And then the third thing that we can adjust is rebound. The rebound is talking about how quickly the suspension will rebound back open after hitting a bump. So it's kind of saying how much of a trampoline do you want your bike to feel like. The long and short of it is really fast will open up really quickly, and really slow will open up a little bit slower. Let's take a deep dive into how to adjust the air pressure on your bike. Now, the air pressure has a little valve here that is the exact same as a Schrader valve on your car. However, it's really high pressure, really low volume. So you'll need to have a special shock pump. It's worth either buying one of these. You can get them here in Australia from about $35. If you don't want to buy one, might even have a friend that you can just borrow one from. But this is an absolute must if we're talking about adjusting your suspension. Before we go ahead and actually make any adjustments, let's talk about what adjustment we're actually measuring. This is where, a little bit earlier, I used the word sag. Sag is talking about how much the suspension will squat just simply under your body weight. I always like to say that when you're measuring your sag, wear all of your riding gear. Make sure you've got your helmet on, maybe perhaps the riding clothes you normally wear. If you wear a backpack, make sure you wear that as well, because we want to set the suspension up perfectly for what you will, I suppose, weigh when you're actually riding the bike. So how do we measure sag? Well, we've got this little O-ring here on the rear shock here, and we have a similar one on the front one, but we're just gonna start with the rear one here. What we wanna do is push this O-ring all the way up to the very start of the stroke, and then we just simply wanna sit on the bike, again, with all your riding gear on that you normally would have, and you're just gonna simply sit on it, take your feet off the ground, and then get back off. You don't wanna bounce around and do all of these sorts of things, because then that could change the number. Nice. So now that we've sat on it with our body weight, we're gonna grab a little ruler here, and we're gonna measure how much this O-ring has moved us here. A typical rule of thumb that most mountain bikers will use is on the rear shock, we want to have about 25% worth of sag, and on the fork, on average, we wanna have about 30% of sag. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna grab our little ruler, and we're going to measure the stanchion of the shock. The stanchion is just this little part that actually slides in and out. So we can see that the whole length of this one is, I can see that that's maybe 45 millimeters, I reckon, so 4.5 centimeters. So if I was to then measure the actual section that the O-ring has moved, and I would be saying that looks like maybe 1.5, now we can grab our calculator and we can work out what that works out as a percentage. All right, now with those two numbers that we've got there, if we grab our calculator, I was saying, at least on this example here, that I think the sag is about 1.5 centimeters, and I'm gonna divide that by the overall length of the shock, which in this one was about 4.5. And I consider that equals 0.3 reoccurring. So that's 33% sag, which means that this one is a little bit too hard. Now remember earlier in the video that I was saying I wanna bring that number down to about 25%. By bringing that number down, that means that I wanna pump some air into the suspension. So we're gonna use our trusty little shock pump here. So these shock pumps here actually have a little thread on the end of the hose here. That's gonna thread onto our shock here, both on the rear shock or onto the front shock. On the rear shock here, we've got a little valve cap. Now trust me, everybody loses their valve cap, so make sure you put it in a nice safe space that you're not gonna lose it. All right, we're just gonna thread this part straight onto where we took that valve cap off, and then we're gonna watch the dial here until the pressure finally kicks in. And that's how we know that we're ready to start pumping it up or letting pressure out. Now there's two different things that we can do now that it's all connected. We can either pump air in by pumping it up, or they'll usually have a little bleed valve so you can slowly let the air out. In this example, I know that we need to pump it up because we're at 33%. We want to bring it down to about 25%. You're going to make a little adjustment, test it, a little adjustment, test it, a little adjustment, and we'll keep going around until you think that it's perfect. Now that we've changed the air pressure, let's test what we've done and see if it's gone just enough or if we need to do more or less. So again, we'll reset the little O-ring right up to the start, sit down on the bike, take our feet off the ground, stand up, looks pretty good, but let's measure it to be sure. 1.3, I reckon, 1.3 centimeters. So with our trusty little calculator here, 1.3 centimeters divided by 4.5 works out as 28.9. I think that's pretty damn close. 29% is pretty damn close, but I think we can do a little bit better. We're gonna make another quick little adjustment and see if we can get it perfect. Oh man, that's only just over 1. I'm gonna call that 1.1. 1.1 divided by the overall length, which is 4.5, 24.4. Man, that's as close to perfect as I think you could ever get. We're definitely gonna work with that. Now, let's have a look at the fork as well. Oh, I forgot to put the valve cap back on. To check the fork, the way that I've always been taught to do it is, again, we're gonna put the O-ring all the way down at the very start of the stanchion. And remember before with the rear shock, I was saying that we wanna take our feet off the ground, and all that that's doing is making sure that our body weight's on the bike. With the fork, when we're riding the bike, we tend not to be riding it like this. We're riding it, you know, standing up on the bike, ready to attack. So this one might be a little bit more difficult, but what I like to do is I sort of, you know, get more or less comfortable on the bike, and then I can stand up on it and then get back off. Now notice how I didn't bounce the suspension to get back off. I didn't grab the front brake when I got off. I just simply tried to just step off. Cool. Okay, so you might be able to see there on the camera that this one hardly moved. First of all, that's pretty obvious to me that it's way too hard for me. So I definitely need to let quite a bit of air out so that it can sag quite a bit more. We're gonna complete the exact same process that we did with the rear shock. Now we're just doing it on the front. So the overall length of this, I'm gonna say is 130 millimeters. And of course it is because it's the Santa Cruz Tallboy. So 130 mil, and that's like 1.1. So I need to let quite a lot of air out. Same deal as the rear shock. This one is gonna have a little air port here as well. On the fork, it's usually hidden underneath a nice little cover, and then we're gonna thread our shock pump back onto the valve just there again. So we know that this one was a little bit too hard for me. So I need to let a little bit of pressure out. We're gonna use our little bleed valve here to slowly let some pressure out. For what it's worth, we're at about 140 or 145 PSI here. Perfect, all right, let's measure that. Cool, 3.5 centimeters. All right, so again, we're doing 3.5 divided by the overall length of the suspension, and that says 26.9, 27%. I'm gonna leave it with that. I'm very happy with that. Again, you could keep repeating this process until you get it absolutely perfect, because we were saying, as a rule of thumb, most people want about 30% of sag. So now I wanna talk about rebound and compression. I'm bundling these two together because they both are adjusted with little dials. We count how many clicks we turn these dials, and that's how we measure how much we're adjusting them. We count in clicks. So the first step is we want to locate where these dials are. On this bike, we have rebound and compression. I can see that the compression switch is here on the top, and the rebound switch is almost always a red one, and this one happens to be down the bottom. So that I can reach the bottom and make this nice and clear for the video, I'm gonna flip the bike upside down because the dial that we're talking about adjusting, that rebound dial, is actually just here on the bottom. We can also see that we have a positive and a negative, a plus and a minus. On your bike, it might even be a hare and a tortoise. A hare is like a rabbit, so it might look like a rabbit. A hare or a positive is making it faster, and then the negative or the tortoise is making it a little bit slower. So we can adjust whichever way we need to go. So now we're going to adjust these dials into the middle. We're going to move the dial all the way towards one side, whether that's all the way towards the positive or all the way towards the negative, and then we're going to count how many clicks it has until it gets back to the other side. That's how we're going to work out how many clicks there are. Obviously half that, and that's going to be what the middle is. Now, a little top tip that I have here as well, to know what your current settings are, as you're turning the dial, count how many clicks you can feel, maybe write it down on a little piece of paper so that you can remember sort of how your bike was currently set up, so that when you make an adjustment, you know how it used to be, you know how different it is. So I'm just gonna turn this one all the way towards the negative. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So just to be sure, I'm gonna write down here, 9 clicks out. Perfect, all right. So I know that it was at 9 initially. And now I'm gonna count all the way back to the start. So we've got 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 12. Perfect, so there's actually 12 clicks there. Half of 12 is 6. So if we were to find 6, if we were to go back to 6, then we'd be right in the center. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, perfect. All right, I'm happy with that. So now that we're right in the center, we've got 6 clicks either way of us, so we're right in the center there. Now I'm gonna copy the exact same thing on the different dials that we had there. So here we've adjusted the rebound. Now I'm gonna have a look at the compression. On your bike, you might even have more than just 2 dials. You might have high speed compression and low speed compression. And I would still repeat the same process for all of the ones that have a dial. This will put them all into a very neutral position, and that way it's a really good starting place so that you can now go and make your own adjustments. All right, and now we're gonna do the exact same thing on the shock. Again, we're gonna find the rebound, which is the red one, and then we're gonna try and find the compression if it has one. Sometimes the rear shock might not have a compression setting. Nonetheless, we're gonna go through all the way to one side so we can see where it is at the moment, and then we'll count all the way through and work out what the middle is and put it back there. And now we're up to the fun, but admittedly time-consuming part. You get to ride your bike. So grab your trusty little helmet and a little backpack as well. I recommend having a backpack so that you can carry your shock pump in the backpack, and then perhaps even a notepad and pen, or even just the notes section on your phone. And we're gonna hide that behind a tree at the top of that section of trail. Go and find yourself a trail that you feel relatively confident on, a section of track that you've ridden numerous times. We're not trying to show off, we're just trying to be very repetitive over one section of trail. If you've got your backpack at the top with your notepad and pen, do that section of trail. When you get back to the top, if you think you need to make an adjustment, maybe you need to speed something up or slow something down, write down what you've done, make the adjustment on your bike, try it, see how it feels. Does it feel better? Does it feel worse? Do you need to adjust it this way or that way? Whatever you think, when you get back to that section of trail again, you can write down what you think you need to change and then again, make that adjustment. You're gonna keep doing this process however many times it takes until you think that your bike is perfect. If you don't know what you need to change, you've done that section of trail and you thought, it feels like a bike, I don't know. Change something, and then when you do that section of trail again, you might be able to feel a bit of a difference. You might feel that it's a little bit scarier riding your bike because it's reacting differently. You might find that it just feels planted and perfect now. You wouldn't know if you didn't try. For example, the first thing that I like to adjust when I get a new bike is the compression. So I'll do that section of track and then I'll usually do +2 clockwise, for example. And then I know that I've gone 2 clicks that way. If I like it, cool. If I want to try a little bit harder, I could even go maybe 2 clicks further. Or if I didn't like it, then I can come back. I like to start with compression personally. All right, so now we've got back from our bike ride. Hopefully we have a little notepad that says all the different settings that we're at. Now this is something that I strongly recommend doing. Write down whatever current settings that you found that you reckon are perfect. The reason I say this is air can slowly leak out of the suspension. So for example, you might pump it up to 175 PSI, for example, and then 6 months down the track, you check it with the shock pump and it's at 165 PSI. I know that doesn't sound like much of a difference, but it might make the whole bike feel a little bit different. Lucky you have all your settings written down, so you're able to bring your suspension back to how you liked it without having to redo this whole process again. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you've learned how to set up your suspension on your mountain bike quickly and easily. Now remember, all of this is great, and I strongly recommend writing it all down so that if you were to get a new bike down the track, you've got all your settings ready to go. Now we know about air, we know about rebound, we know about compression, and hopefully you have a bit more of an idea of everything you need to know about suspension. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next video. See you guys.